There are moments in life that pass like any other, quiet, familiar, easy to forget. And then there are moments that feel different, not louder, not brighter, just still, as if the world is holding its breath. Picture this. You're pouring your morning coffee, thinking about work, your child getting ready for school. Everything seems normal, but deep inside, something is shifting. A flicker in your chest, a weight in the air. You try to shake it off. You blame the deadline, the weather, a poor night's sleep, but something doesn't let go. Today's story is about that feeling, about a mother, a quiet town, and a morning that almost ended in tragedy, if not for a sign. A real, divine sign. One that came before disaster had a chance to arrive. These are the moments we call angel signs before tragedy, the whispers we can't explain, the invisible hands that nudge us back from the edge, even when we don't know we're standing on it. Was it just coincidence, or was someone, watching over them? In the story you're about to hear, a single mother felt that warning. She didn't understand it at first, but she listened, and because she did, everything changed. Before the worst happens, sometimes the universe sends a sign. If you believe in guardian angels, fate, or simply want to hear real stories of life-changing moments, subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us for today's powerful story. Now, let me take you to Willow Creek and the quiet morning that could have changed everything. That morning unfolded like any other. Lily had left for school with her backpack swinging and shoes untied, waving over her shoulder as she disappeared down the gravel path. Emma stood in the doorway a moment longer than usual, watching the trees sway gently under a silver sky. The air was cool, the kind that carries the scent of river mist and memory. By late morning, the house had settled into its usual quiet. No cartoons, no footsteps, no clinking dishes. Just the faint ticking of the kitchen clock and the soft hiss of the kettle cooling. Emma sat by the window with her second cup of coffee, the mug warm in her hands. The light filtering through the lace curtains gave everything a soft glow, like the house had turned into a faded photograph, still, peaceful, but not entirely calm. The wind had died down, no birds, no cars, just a silence that seemed to hum with something beneath it. She shifted in her seat and took a sip. That's when it happened. A sound, not a creak or a knock or a passing breeze, but a whisper. So soft it almost wasn't there, but so clear it couldn't be ignored. "Leave now." 2 words, that was all. Emma froze. The cup paused mid-air. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, then the kitchen. No television, no radio, no open apps on her laptop, and the voice. It hadn't sounded like her own thoughts. It hadn't belonged to anyone she knew. It was gentle but firm, like a stranger touching your shoulder in a crowd and asking you to move, kindly but without room for debate. She stood up slowly, setting the mug down without looking away from the room around her. Her heart was racing now, the steady rhythm of ordinary life thrown off by something invisible and sudden. "Hello," she whispered, almost afraid of being answered. The house didn't respond, but something inside her had changed. It would have been easy to laugh it off. And she tried. She shook her head, exhaled a nervous breath and muttered, "Probably something from a video, or maybe the wind." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it, because there had been no wind, and her phone was off. The whisper hadn't come from around her, it had come from through her. There was no more noise after that, just stillness, but not the comforting kind. This was the kind of quiet that feels like it's watching. Emma sat back down, but her hands trembled slightly. She looked out the window at the trees beyond the yard. They were no longer swaying. Everything outside had gone still, as if the world had paused. She didn't know what to make of it. She didn't know what leave now even meant. Leave where? Go why? But somewhere deep inside, beneath logic, beneath reason, a tiny fracture had formed in the calm surface of her day. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was something older, something deeper, like the beginning of a memory she hadn't lived yet. And though she tried to return to work, to email clients, to answer texts, she couldn't shake the feeling. Not just that something was coming, but that something had already arrived and had warned her just in time. That night, sleep didn't come gently. Emma turned beneath the weight of invisible thoughts, her pillow damp with warmth, her ears searching the silence for something she couldn't name. And when she finally drifted off, it wasn't into peace, it was into a dream that felt far too real. She was walking through her home, at least she thought it was her home. But the walls were darker, distorted, covered in soot. The air was thick, laced with something bitter, something burned. The furniture was familiar but wrong, twisted, blurred, as if someone had taken her life and soaked it in shadow. She moved slowly through the hall, barefoot, her fingertips brushing the scorched wallpaper, and then Lily, standing at the far end of the corridor, barefoot, silent, her hair tangled from sleep, her face pale in the dim flicker of light. Emma called out. Her voice echoed strangely, swallowed by the space. She ran, forward. Each step felt heavy, like the ground itself didn't want her to reach her daughter. And just as she extended her hand, just as Lily's small fingers touched hers, a blinding flash. Pure white, a soundless burst that erased everything. Emma gasped awake. She sat upright in bed, her breath ragged, soaked in sweat that chilled against her skin. The room was quiet, but her heart pounded like she'd outrun something she couldn't see. Without thinking, she rushed to Lily's room. There she was, safe. Curled beneath her blanket, one arm tucked beneath her cheek, breathing softly. The moonlight rested on her like a shield. Emma stood in the doorway, hands shaking, tears caught somewhere between fear and relief. She whispered, "Just a dream." But her voice cracked, because it didn't feel like just a dream. It had weight, texture, a kind of truth that nightmares don't usually carry. She sat beside Lily's bed, resting her hand gently on her daughter's back, feeling the rise and fall of her breath. She stayed there longer than she needed to, listening to the small sounds of sleep, and all the while, that fear stayed with her. Not the fear of what she saw, but of what it might mean, because deep down, beneath logic and reason, something inside her whispered, this wasn't just a dream. This was a warning, and she had no idea what to do with that. Only that she could no longer pretend. Nothing was coming. The next morning moved slowly, as if time itself was walking on eggshells. The sun filtered in through the kitchen window, soft and pale, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floor. The air smelled faintly of laundry soap and warm cotton. Emma had almost convinced herself it had all been in her head, the whisper, the dream, the weight in her chest. Almost. She was folding a small stack of Lily's clothes in the living room. Tiny shirts, mismatched socks, a favorite hoodie with the worn sleeves. A breeze stirred the curtains, but the air felt heavier than usual, as if the house itself was listening. Then, without warning, a crash, not the sharp sound of something falling by accident. This was deep, heavy, like the house had exhaled too hard. Emma dropped the sweater in her hands and ran toward the hallway. There, at the end of the corridor, surrounded by jagged pieces of silvered glass, was the antique mirror. Shattered. It had hung on that wall for years. An heirloom from her grandmother, passed down like a whispered memory, thick oak frame, weighty, solid. The kind of mirror that didn't just show a reflection, it held it. Emma froze at the doorway. The silence after the crash was deafening. She stepped forward carefully, slippers crunching over glass, heart pounding. There had been no tremor, no loud noise, No door slammed, no reason. The nails in the wall were still intact. The wire hadn't snapped. There was nothing to explain the fall. Just a fall. She knelt down slowly. Her fingertips hovered above the shards, afraid to touch them. And then she looked into the glass. Not all of it, just one sliver. What she saw wasn't quite herself. It was her face, yes, but not whole. Fragmented, warped, eyes distorted, mouth caught mid-expression, like a version of her frozen in fear from the inside out. A chill rippled through her. For a moment it felt as if the reflection was watching her. Her chest tightened, a familiar pressure, like in the dream, like in the silence after the whisper. She stood up quickly, heart racing, and stepped back from the mess. Her thoughts tried to pull her toward logic. Maybe it was age, weak hardware, vibration from the washer. But none of it fit, because mirrors don't fall like that. Not in a house without movement, not without reason, and certainly not after a dream like that. Emma leaned against the wall, staring at the broken pieces, the hallway suddenly colder than it had been moments before. Something was trying to speak, not in language, not in noise, but in interruptions, little ruptures in the calm. She didn't understand what was coming, but she knew whatever it was getting closer. The house had grown quiet again. Outside, the afternoon light was turning gold, stretching long shadows across the porch. Inside, Emma moved slowly, her mind clouded by the crash of the mirror, the dream, the whisper. She tried to return to normal, tidying up, checking her inbox, reheating her coffee, but nothing felt real. It was like she was floating just above her own life, watching it from a distance, and then a knock, soft, barely more than a tap. But in the stillness it echoed like thunder. Emma paused in the hallway, heart ticking faster. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door slowly, fingers tight around the knob. Standing on the porch was a woman she had never seen before, mid-50s, maybe older. Pale eyes, hair tucked into a neat braid. She wore a long grey coat, out of place in the warm breeze, and her hands were folded calmly in front of her. She didn't smile, but her presence wasn't threatening. It was still. "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice low and gentle, almost like she was speaking through a dream. "I believe I was meant to come here." Emma's breath caught. What?" The woman didn't move. Her eyes held something, like grief or knowledge too heavy to explain. "There's something coming," she said, "and you need to trust what you've been feeling." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Emma opened her mouth, but no sound came. It was as if the language had been pulled from her lungs. Without another word, the woman reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. She placed it gently in Emma's palm. A medallion, silver, cool to the touch, engraved with a single pair of wings. Emma looked down at it, stunned. When she looked back up, the woman was already walking away. "Wait!" Emma stepped onto the porch, but the woman was gone. Not walking down the path, not turning the corner. Gone. She scanned the street. Empty. No footsteps, no car, no trace, just the wind picking up, brushing past her like an invisible presence. She stood there, medallion clenched in her hand, heart pounding with something that wasn't quite fear. It was recognition. Whatever was happening, it wasn't in her head. The signs weren't just whispers and shattered glass. Now they had a face, a voice, a message. And something inside her, some deep, trembling instinct, knew. She was no longer imagining the danger. She was being prepared for it. Evening crept in slowly, painting the sky in shades of rust and lavender, the kind of sunset that should have brought peace. But Emma felt none. She sat at her desk with the glow of her laptop screen casting pale light across her face. The cursor blinked on a half-finished email, but her hands were still. Her thoughts refused to settle. Every sound in the house felt louder than usual, her heartbeat thudding in her chest, the low hum of the fridge, the distant creak of the floorboards. Her eyes kept drifting to the hallway, to the place where the mirror had once hung. That blank stretch of wall now felt like an open mouth, silent but watching. She tried to push it all away, tried to ground herself in logic, in routine, but something underneath it all kept pressing forward, like a tide she could no longer resist. And then, from Lily's room, a voice. "Mom, can we go to Grandma's tonight? I miss her." Emma turned. The question came so softly, so unexpectedly, that it didn't feel like a request. It felt like a cue. They hadn't talked about visiting her mother. No plans had been made, but the moment the words landed, Emma felt it, deep and clear. A nudge, gentle, but insistent, like something whispering again, just behind her heartbeat. "Leave now." The same words, the same rhythm. Her breath caught in her throat. She walked slowly to Lily's door, looked in to see her curled on the bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with something she couldn't explain. Emma forced a smile. "Yeah," she said, "that sounds like a good idea." She didn't rush, but she didn't waste time either. Within minutes, she was packing an overnight bag, nothing big, just pajamas, toothbrushes, a change of clothes. Her hands moved with purpose, even though her mind was spinning. She kept telling herself it was just precaution, just in case. But her body knew something her thoughts hadn't yet caught up to. As she zipped the bag and checked the locks on the back door, a strange calm settled. Over her, not peace exactly. Something closer to obedience. She didn't know why, she didn't know what for, but she knew this much. When life speaks in whispers, it's not always meant to be understood, only followed. Emma reached for the medallion as she passed the kitchen counter. It was colder than before. The silver wings caught the last light of the evening, glowing faintly in her palm. She closed her fingers around it like a prayer and turned to Lily, who was already waiting at the door with her little backpack, still clutching her stuffed rabbit. Emma knelt beside her, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Let's go, sweetheart," she whispered. They stepped outside just as the sun slipped behind the trees. The light faded fast, too fast. What had been golden minutes ago was now a deepening blue, stretched thin across the rooftops. The wind had risen, rustling the branches overhead, but it wasn't the usual breeze. It carried weight, like it was warning them not to linger. The street was quiet, too quiet. No children playing, no dogs barking, no footsteps or doors slamming. Just a strange, pressing silence that clung to everything, like the world itself was holding its breath again. Emma buckled Lily into the back seat and slid into the driver's side. Her hands trembled for a moment before gripping the wheel. She pulled out of the driveway slowly, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. The house stood there, still and dark, the curtains unmoving. Nothing looked out of place, and yet everything felt wrong. As the road curved and the house disappeared behind them, something shifted. Emma exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours, and then, quietly, peace. It settled over her like a warm shawl. Not the kind of peace that comes from answers, but the kind that comes when you've done something without knowing why. And you know in your bones it was right. Lily hummed softly in the back seat. Emma glanced at her in the mirror, and then down at her own hand, still wrapped around the medallion. She didn't know what she had been running from. She didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in days, she didn't feel afraid. She felt watched over, like someone or something had been waiting for this moment. Not to punish, not to test, but to guide, to whisper when she was ready to hear, to protect once she chose to listen. It happened less than an hour later. Emma was standing in her mother's kitchen, the soft clink of teacups, filling the quiet space, the scent of chamomile rising with the steam. Lily was in the living room, curled up with a blanket and a picture book, her small voice reading aloud to no one in particular. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. And then a sound, low at first, like a distant roll of thunder, but it didn't fade. It grew, rising into a deep, vibrating roar that rattled the windows and made the ground tremble beneath their feet. Then came the light, bright, sudden, spreading like fire behind the hills. Emma's teacup slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Her mother gasped. They rushed to the front porch, just as the orange glow climbed into the sky, turning clouds into mirrors of flame. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She didn't need to ask. Her soul already knew. Back inside, she fumbled for the remote with shaking hands. The news came on mid-broadcast, sirens flashing across the screen, the reporter's voice tight with urgency. A gas explosion has rocked a residential neighborhood just outside Willow Creek. Emergency crews are on the scene. Several homes have been affected. At least one has been completely destroyed. The screen cut to aerial footage. Houses charred and broken, black smoke curling into the sky, like a warning sent too late. And then, her street. The corner of the screen showed what had once been their front porch, now unrecognizable. Ash and flame devoured the shape of her life. The bedroom she had folded laundry in, the hallway, where the mirror fell, the window where Lily used to sit and draw pictures of birds, gone. Emma's knees gave out. She collapsed into a chair, arms trembling as she pulled Lily close, burying her face in her daughter's hair, breathing in the scent of safety, of presence, of life. Lily looked up, confused. "Mummy!" Emma couldn't speak. Her eyes welled with tears too deep to hold back, not just from fear, not just from shock, but from knowing, the whisper, the dream, the mirror, the stranger, the medallion, the question from her daughter, "Can we go to Grandma's?" All of it, every piece, something had been guiding her, calling her, saving her. She rocked gently in that chair, Lily pressed to her chest, heart aching from the closeness of what could have been. She had left just in time because something holy had made her listen. The days that followed moved like fog, thick, quiet, and impossible to hold on to. Reporters stood near the ruins with solemn voices. Insurance agents asked for lists of everything lost. Neighbors stopped by with blankets, wide eyes, and words like lucky and unbelievable. But Emma barely registered any of it, because in her heart only one truth mattered. They were alive, not by chance, not by luck, but by something greater. She watched Lily sleep on the couch at her mother's house, cheeks flushed with warmth, safe in a home that hadn't been touched by fire. Emma sat nearby each night, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, proof that they were still here. And still her mind kept turning over every moment that led them away from danger, the whisper in the stillness, the dream that burned itself into her bones, the mirror crashing without cause, the stranger with pale eyes and a medallion of wings. Lily's sudden, gentle request to go, each piece on its own, might have seemed small, dismissible, forgettable, but together they formed a path. One she hadn't seen at first, one she didn't even realize she was walking, until she looked, her back, and saw that every step had been placed with purpose. She began telling people not to be dramatic, not to seek attention, but because she had to, because staying silent felt like turning away from the very thing that had saved them. She told the story to neighbors, to friends, to strangers who crossed her path, and some smiled politely, others nodded, unsure. A few leaned in, eyes wide, as if remembering something they, too, had once felt, but never explained. Emma didn't push. She didn't preach. She just shared what had happened softly, honestly, because deep down she believed this. There is always something beyond what we see. A presence, a pattern, a whisper in the wind. And sometimes it speaks, not to scare us, but to save us. Months had passed, the ashes had settled, life had not returned to normal, it had become something entirely new. Emma and Lily moved into a modest house across town. It was smaller, older, and creaked with age, but it felt safe and strangely alive. Morning light pooled through the windows, as if it too had found a reason to stay. Just beside the front door hung the silver medallion, the one with the wings. It caught the sunlight every afternoon, casting soft shapes across the walls. Above it, a new mirror, simple and clear, gifted by her mother. Emma passed it every morning, pausing to look into her reflection, not for her hair or her clothes, but for something else, something deeper, a presence, a promise, a quiet thank you. She no longer questioned the dream. She no longer dismissed the whisper. She no longer tried to explain the stranger with pale eyes and perfect timing. Because she had seen what happened when you listen, when you follow that voice inside, when you act on a feeling you can't explain. She had been saved, not just from a house fire, but from the silence that keeps us from believing. There was no grand sign posted in the sky, no booming voice, no flashing light, just moments, small moments, strange ones, beautiful ones, moments that only made sense when they were strung together, like beads on a thread you didn't know you were holding. Looking back, Emma saw the pattern, the whisper before dawn, the mirror falling without reason, the child's voice asking to leave, the stranger at the door with eyes like a winter sky, and in the middle of it all, something gentle but unshakable, a hand unseen, a voice unspoken, a love untouched by time. Some might call it intuition, others divine timing, guardian angels. God. Emma didn't need to name it anymore. She just needed to feel it, to honor it, to keep listening. And so she did. Every time the wind stirred the trees outside the window, every time Lily laughed, alive and whole, every time she reached for the doorknob and felt the cold metal of that medallion beneath her palm, she remembered that life is not just what we see, that sometimes the greatest miracles arrive quietly, not to prove anything, but to protect everything. And maybe that's all faith really is, the decision to believe that something more is moving beneath the surface, even when no one else sees it. So now, dear listener, we leave you with this. Have you ever felt a moment like that? A strange dream, a voice that came out of nowhere, a coincidence that felt too perfect to be random. Have you ever been guided by something you couldn't explain? Do you think angels are still trying to reach us, even when we're not looking? And most of all, what would you do if you were saved by a sign? If this story touched your heart, don't let these signs go unnoticed. Subscribe to Saved by a Sign and stay with us to hear more real stories of faith, mystery, and the moments when life whispers just in time. Thank you for staying until the end. But remember, there are stories that aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be felt. We'll see you in the next one, if you're still listening.